The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It drummed against the windows of our empty house like fingers tapping impatiently, waiting for something that would never come. I stood in my parents' bedroom, holding my father's worn leather wallet in one hand and my mother's reading glasses in the other. These small objects felt impossibly heavy, as if they contained the entire weight of 2 lives now gone. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. My name is Ryan Walker, and I buried both my parents on a Tuesday afternoon in October. The cemetery had been nearly empty, just a handful of faces beneath black umbrellas, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. My wife Sarah stood beside me, her hand cold in mine, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the caskets. But there were 2 faces I had expected to see that weren't there at all. Richard and Diane Bennett, my in-laws, Sarah's parents. They lived 40 minutes away. They had known about the funeral for a week. My father had helped Richard fix his car 3 summers ago, spending an entire Saturday under the hood in the blazing heat. My mother had knitted Diane a scarf for Christmas, pale blue with silver threads, and Diane had worn it exactly once before tucking it into a drawer and forgetting about it. But they hadn't come. They had a prior engagement, Sarah had whispered to me the night before the funeral, her voice thin and apologetic. My dad has a golf tournament and Mom is hosting her book club. They send their condolences. Condolences. The word had tasted like ash in my mouth. Now, standing in the hollow silence of my childhood home, I felt something shift inside me. Grief is a strange companion. It doesn't arrive all at once like they tell you in movies. It comes in waves, in moments, in the sudden realization that you'll never hear your mother's laugh again or feel your father's hand on your shoulder. It comes when you're holding a wallet that still smells faintly of Old Spice and leather, and you realize that the people who were supposed to love you by extension of loving your wife couldn't spare 3 hours to say goodbye to the people who raised you. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with my free hand, expecting another sympathy text from a distant cousin or an old family friend. Instead, it was Sarah. Ryan, can you come home? My parents are here. They want to talk to us about something important. I stared at the message for a long moment. Important. The word felt obscene in the context of everything that had just happened. I typed back, "Be there in 20 minutes." When I walked through our front door, I could hear Richard's booming voice before I even saw him. He was the kind of man who filled every room he entered, not with warmth or kindness, but with sheer presence. Tall, barrel-chested, with silver hair he kept meticulously groomed and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Ryan!" he called out as I stepped into the living room. "There's the man of the hour." We were just telling Sarah about the most exciting news. Diane sat perched on our couch like a bird on a wire, her manicured hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. Sarah stood by the window, her arms crossed, and I could see the tension in her shoulders even from across the room. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my keys on the side table. Richard clapped his hands together, a gesture I had come to associate with him asking for something. "Well, son, you know how much we love our Emily." Emily was Sarah's younger sister, 26 years old, engaged to a tech entrepreneur named Brad who wore expensive sneakers and talked incessantly about disruption and market optimization. I had met him twice and disliked him both times. "Sure," I said carefully. "She's getting married in the spring," Diane added, her voice soft but deliberate. "And we want to give her the wedding of her dreams. The venue alone is going to be spectacular, the Rosewood Estate, you know the one? Where the Vanderbilts used to summer." I didn't know the one and I didn't care. "That's great," I said, my voice flat. "Congratulations to Emily." Richard's smile widened, but there was something calculating behind it. "Here's the thing, Ryan. We've been doing the math, and a wedding like this, the kind Emily deserves, well, it's going to run us about $120,000. The number hung in the air like smoke. "We've saved about 70, Diane continued, picking up where Richard left off. "But we're still short. And we know that with your parents passing." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "You'll be inheriting their estate." The room tilted slightly. I felt Sarah's eyes on me, but I couldn't look at her. "We were hoping," Richard said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, "that you might consider helping us out. Just 50,000. Think of it as an investment in family. Emily is Sarah's only sister, after all." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "You want me to give you $50,000, I said slowly, "for a wedding. We'd pay you back, of course," Diane said quickly. Eventually, I repeated. Richard stood up, spreading his hands in a placating gesture. "Now, Ryan, I know this might seem like a big ask, but family helps family. Your parents would have understood that. They were good people." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break, not dramatic or violent. It was quiet, like a thread pulled too tight finally giving way. "My parents," I said, my voice low and controlled, "were buried 3 days ago, and you weren't there." Richard's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into that practiced smile. "We explained that to Sarah. We had commitments. We sent flowers." "You sent flowers," I said. "You sent flowers to the funeral of 2 people who welcomed you into their home, who treated you like family, who helped you when you needed it. And you couldn't cancel a golf game to be there when they were lowered into the ground." "Ryan," Sarah started, but I held up my hand. "And now," I continued, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it, "now you're standing in my living room, 3 days after I buried my parents, asking me to hand over $50,000 so your daughter can have a wedding at a mansion." Diane's face had gone pale. Richard's jaw tightened. "Now listen here, son. I'm not your son." I cut him off. "And the answer is no." The word felt good. Clean. Final. Richard's face flushed red. "Sarah, talk to your husband. He's being unreasonable." Sarah looked between us, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment I thought she might side with them, might tell me that I was overreacting, that family was family, that we should find a way to help. But instead, she walked across the room and stood beside me. "I think you should leave," she said quietly. Diane stood abruptly, her purse clutched to her chest like a shield. "Sarah Elizabeth Bennett, we are your parents. We raised you. We deserve more respect than this." "You deserve to be at my husband's parents' funeral," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. "And you weren't. So no, you don't get to come here and make demands. You don't get to act like this is reasonable." Richard's face was now a deep crimson. "You'll regret this," he said, pointing a finger at me. "Both of you. When you need us, don't come crawling back." "We won't," I said. They left in a storm of slamming doors and angry mutters, Diane's heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor until the sound faded into nothing. When the door finally closed, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her hands covering her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered through her fingers. "I'm so sorry." I sat down beside her and pulled her hands away gently. Her eyes were red, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You have nothing to apologize for," I said. "They're my parents. They should have been there. They should have cared more about you than a stupid golf tournament." She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. "And then to come here and ask for money like nothing happened." I wrapped my arms around her and held her while she cried. Outside, the rain had started again, a soft patter against the windows that sounded almost like applause. The weeks that followed were strange and difficult. My parents' estate was exactly as complicated as I had feared. Legal documents, tax forms, accounts to close, possessions to sort through. The house they had lived in for 37 years was filled with a lifetime of accumulated memories. Photo albums, old furniture, my childhood drawings still magnet to the refrigerator beneath faded grocery lists in my mother's handwriting. Sarah's parents didn't call. Not to apologize, not to check in, not even to maintain the pretense of civility. Sarah called Emily once, hoping to explain, but her sister had been cold and clipped on the phone. "You're ruining my wedding," Emily had said. "Mom and Dad are stressed because of you and Ryan. They're having to dip into their retirement savings now. I hope you're happy." Sarah had hung up without responding, and I had found her sitting on the bathroom floor 20 minutes later, staring at nothing. "They've turned her against us," she said. "Then she was never really on our side to begin with," I replied, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. But grief has a way of clarifying things. In sorting through my parents' belongings, I found letters they had written to each other during my father's deployment overseas, back before I was born. I found birthday cards my mother had saved from every year of my life, each one carefully preserved in a box labeled Ryan's Memories. I found a journal my father had kept during the last year of his life, filled with notes about things he was grateful for. Ryan called today. He sounded happy. That's all I ever wanted. These discoveries broke me in new ways, but they also reminded me of what love actually looked like. It wasn't transactional. It wasn't conditional. It didn't come with price tags or demands. One evening, about 6 weeks after the funeral, I was going through my father's desk when I found an envelope addressed to me in his handwriting. Inside was a letter, dated 3 months before he died. "Dear Ryan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope I went peacefully with your mother by my side, because God knows I can't function without that woman. I wanted to write this while I still had the clarity to say what needs to be said. You've always been a good son, better than I deserved. You're kind where I was often gruff, patient where I was quick to anger, thoughtful where I was stubborn. You got those qualities from your mother. Thank goodness. I know life hasn't always been easy for you. I know Sarah's family hasn't always been welcoming or kind. I've seen the way they look at you sometimes, like you're not quite good enough because you chose teaching over law, because you drive a used car, because you're not interested in their country club nonsense. But here's what I want you to remember. The people who matter will show up. They'll show up in the hard times, in the boring times, in the times when there's nothing to gain from being there except the knowledge that they care. Everyone else is just noise. Your mother and I are so proud of you. We're proud of the man you've become, the husband you are, the life you're building. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Don't let anyone convince you that your worth is measured in dollars or status or anything other than the kindness you show and the love you give. Take care of yourself, son. Take care of Sarah. And remember that we're always with you, even when you can't see us. Love always, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, my vision blurring with tears. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my wallet, right next to the photo of my parents on their wedding day. 2 months after the confrontation, Sarah and I made a decision. We sold my parents' house, a process that was both painful and necessary, and used part of the proceeds to pay off our mortgage. The rest we put into a trust for the children we hope to have someday, and into a scholarship fund at the high school where I taught, named in honor of my parents. The scholarship would go to students who demonstrated kindness and integrity, not just academic excellence. Students who helped others without expecting recognition, who showed up for their communities, who understood that success wasn't measured in money, but in the positive impact you had on the world around you. When the local paper ran a story about the scholarship, complete with a photo of my parents, Sarah's phone rang. It was Diane. Sarah answered on speaker so I could hear. "I saw the article," Diane said, her voice tight. "You had money for a scholarship, but not for your sister's wedding?" Sarah's hand trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "That money was never yours to claim, Mom. It was Ryan's inheritance from his parents. Parents you couldn't be bothered to mourn with us." "We've already been over this," Diane snapped. "We had prior commitments. You're both being incredibly petty and childish about this." "No," Sarah said. "We're being clear about our boundaries. You taught me a lot of things growing up, Mom. But one thing you never taught me was that family means showing up. I learned that from Ryan's parents. And I'm learning it now from my husband." There was a long pause. Then Diane said, "Your father and I have decided that until you apologize and make this right, we won't be attending any family functions that include you." Emily agrees. "You're not welcome at her wedding." The words should have hurt more than they did. But instead, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Sarah said, "but I stand by our decision. And I stand by Ryan. She hung up before Diane could respond. That night, we sat together on our back porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. Sarah leaned against my shoulder, and I could feel her breathing slow and steady. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked quietly. "I think my dad would be proud of us," I said. "And my mom would have made us hot chocolate and told us that families are built, not born. That the people who love you are the ones who choose to keep showing up, even when it's hard." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm grieving them too, you know, my parents. Or at least, I'm grieving the parents I wished I had. The ones who would have put us first. The ones who would have understood that love isn't measured in dollar signs." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand. "I'm sorry you're having to choose." "I'm not choosing," she said firmly. "I already chose. I chose you the day I married you. I chose us. They're the ones who decided that a party was more important than compassion." Emily's wedding came and went without us. We didn't send a gift. We didn't call. We saw photos later on social media. The Rosewood estate did look spectacular. All twinkling lights and cascading flowers. Emily in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis. No one mentioned the family members who weren't there. No one asked why. But we weren't sitting at home dwelling on it. Instead, we had organized a community dinner at the high school in honor of my parents. An evening where former students, colleagues, neighbors, and friends gathered to share stories and memories. More than 200 people showed up. I heard stories I had never known. About the time my dad stayed late to help a student fix their car so they could get to their night shift job. About my mom tutoring kids for free every summer. About the countless small kindnesses they had extended without ever expecting recognition. One woman, Mrs. Chun, approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your father gave my son his first real chance," she said. "My boy was struggling, getting into trouble, and your dad didn't give up on him. Kept him after school, taught him woodworking, helped him apply to trade school. Now my son owns his own contracting business. He wanted to be here tonight, but he's on a job out of state. He sent this." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 made out to the scholarship fund, with a note. "In memory of the man who taught me that my worth wasn't measured by my mistakes, but by what I chose to do next." I couldn't speak. I just held the check and nodded, my throat too tight for words. Sarah stood beside me all evening, greeting people, listening to stories, her hand finding mine in quiet moments. I could see something settling in her. A sense of peace, perhaps, or clarity about what mattered and what didn't. As the evening wound down and the last guests trickled out, I stood in the empty gymnasium with Sarah, looking at the memory board we had created, covered in photos and handwritten notes. "Your parents built something real," Sarah said softly. "Not a spectacle, not something for show. They built a legacy of kindness. That's worth more than any wedding at any mansion." "Yeah," I said. "It is." She turned to face me, her hands on my chest. "I want that too. I want us to build that kind of life. The kind where people remember us not for what we had, but for who we were to them." "We're already doing it," I said, pulling her close. "One day at a time." 6 months later, we received an unexpected letter. It was from Richard, handwritten on expensive stationery. His usually bold script shaky and uncertain. "Ryan and Sarah, I'm writing this because Diane won't, and because I've had time to think about things I should have thought about a long time ago. Emily's marriage ended 3 weeks after the wedding. Brad was having an affair with a coworker. The whole thing fell apart spectacularly, and now Emily is living with us again, heartbroken and angry at the world. The wedding cost us everything we said it would, and more. We drained our savings. We took out a loan. And for what? A party that celebrated a marriage that didn't even last a month. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness, though if you offered it, I wouldn't turn it down. I'm writing to say that you were right. About all of it. We should have been at the funeral. We should have honored the people who were nothing but kind to us. We should have valued you both over a party. I see that now, though I'm ashamed it took losing so much to understand it. Diane is still angry. She blames you for not helping, blames the world for Emily's pain, blames everyone but herself. I can't carry that anymore. I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of measuring everything in terms of what it costs or what we can show off. Your scholarship program made the news again last week. Another recipient graduated with honors and gave a speech about second chances. I watched the video, and I cried because I realized that your parents gave more to strangers than I ever gave to my own family. I don't expect you to respond to this. I just needed you to know that I see what you've built, and I'm sorry I couldn't see it sooner. Richard. Sarah read the letter twice, her expression unreadable. Then she set it down on the kitchen table and looked at me. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about the anger I had carried, the hurt, the sense of betrayal. I thought about my father's letter, about showing up, about choosing what kind of person I wanted to be. I think, I said slowly, we acknowledge it. We don't pretend the hurt didn't happen, but we don't carry the anger forever either. If he wants to rebuild a relationship, he has to show up. Not with words, with actions. Consistently. Over time. Sarah nodded. And if he doesn't? Then we continue building our life, and we let that be enough. She reached across the table and took my hand. I love you, Ryan Walker. You make me want to be better than I was raised to be. You already are, I said. Richard did show up. Not immediately and not perfectly, but gradually. He started small, a text on my birthday, a card on Sarah's. An offer to help us paint the nursery when Sarah got pregnant 8 months later. He came to the scholarship ceremony that year and sat in the back, quiet and respectful. And afterward he shook my hand and said, "Your parents would be proud." Diane never apologized. She sent a baby gift when our daughter was born, something expensive and impersonal, ordered online and shipped directly to our house. We sent a polite thank you note and nothing more. Emily resurfaced a year later, divorced and apparently working as a real estate agent. She sent Sarah a message. "I'm sorry I was so awful. I was so focused on the wedding that I forgot about everything else. I miss you." Sarah met her for coffee. Once. It was civil, but distant, and afterwards Sarah told me, "Some relationships can't go back to what they were, and that's okay. We can be cordial without being close." Our daughter, Grace Elizabeth Walker, was born on a spring morning with sunlight streaming through the hospital windows. We named her Grace after my mother, whose middle name it had been, and Elizabeth after Sarah's grandmother, the one relative on her side who had always been kind. When I held Grace for the first time, I thought about legacy. Not the kind measured in money or property, but the kind measured in love and values and the choice to show up, day after day, even when it's hard. I thought about my parents and how they would never meet their granddaughter, but how she would know them through stories and through the scholarship that bore their names and through the way Sarah and I chose to live our lives. I thought about the $50,000 that had nearly destroyed our family, and how choosing to say no had ultimately saved us. And I thought about the future, about raising Grace to understand that worth isn't measured in spectacle, that love is shown in presence, that the most important inheritances are the ones that can't be deposited in a bank. Sarah stood beside the hospital bed, her hand on my shoulder, looking down at our daughter with eyes full of wonder and exhaustion and fierce, protective love. "We're going to do this differently," she whispered. "We're going to teach her what really matters." "Yeah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We are." Outside the hospital window, I could see the city spreading out below us, thousands of lives being lived, thousands of stories unfolding, each one a choice between what's easy and what's right, between what glitters and what endures. I had made my choice. We had made our choice. And whatever came next, I knew we would face it together, with the memory of those who loved us lighting the way forward. The rain had stopped. The sun was shining. And for the first time since I stood in that cemetery holding Sarah's cold hand, I felt something like peace. Grace stirred in my arms, her tiny fingers wrapping around my thumb, holding on with a strength that surprised me. I looked down at her perfect, tiny face and made her a silent promise. "I will show up for you, every day, in every way that matters. I will teach you that love is measured in presence, not presence." and I will make sure you know your grandparents through the legacy they left behind." Sarah leaned her head against mine, and we sat there together, the three of us. As the world turned and time moved forward and life continued its beautiful, complicated, heartbreaking, glorious dance. Some stories end with grand gestures or dramatic reversals. This one ends with a quiet room, a sleeping baby, and two people who learned that the best inheritance isn't money or property, but the courage to choose love over obligation, presence over performance, and integrity over appearances. And that, in the end, is worth more than any wedding at any mansion could ever be. Grace was 3 years old when she asked her first question about the people in the photographs. We were in the living room on a Sunday afternoon, sunlight pouring through the windows in golden shafts that caught the dust motes dancing in the air. Grace sat on the floor surrounded by photo albums I had finally worked up the courage to organize, her small fingers tracing the faces of people she would never meet. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to a picture of my father standing in front of his workshop, sawdust covering his overalls, a wide grin splitting his weathered face. I sat down beside her, crossing my legs beneath me. "That's your grandpa, Tom. My dad. Where is he?" The question was innocent, asked with the simple curiosity of a child who doesn't yet understand the permanence of death. Sarah looked up from her book, her eyes meeting mine across the room. "He's not with us anymore, sweetie," I said gently. "He and Grandma Helen." I pointed to another photo, my mother laughing at some long-forgotten joke. "They died before you were born." Grace's face scrunched up in concentration. "Like when my fish went to sleep?" "Yes," I said, though the comparison made my throat tight. "Like that." She turned back to the album, flipping through pages with care unusual for someone so young. Sarah had taught her to be gentle with precious things. "They look nice," Grace said finally. "Did they like hugs?" The question broke something open in my chest. "They loved hugs," I managed. "Grandpa gave bear hugs that lifted you right off the ground. And Grandma always smelled like vanilla and gave the kind of hugs that made you feel safe." "I wish I could hug them," Grace said, her voice wistful. "Me too, baby girl. Me too." That night, after Grace was asleep, I found Sarah standing in the doorway of our daughter's room, watching her breathe in the gentle rhythm of childhood sleep. "She asked about them today," I said quietly. "I heard." Sarah leaned against me. "She'll have questions as she gets older. About why some grandparents are around and others aren't. About my parents." We had been navigating this minefield carefully. Richard had become a sporadic presence in our lives, better than nothing, but far from consistent. He had shown up for Grace's first birthday, missed her second, and made it to her third only after Sarah called him directly. Diane remained distant, sending gifts through the mail like a distant monarch dispensing favors. "We'll tell her the truth," I said, age appropriately, but the truth. That some people love conditionally? That love is shown through action, not words. That the people who matter show up. Sarah turned to look at me, her face illuminated by the night light shaped like a moon. "Your father was right. The people who matter show up." Grace started kindergarten the year the scholarship program celebrated its 5th anniversary. The high school planned a ceremony, inviting past recipients to share their stories. I was asked to speak, and for weeks I agonized over what to say. The night before the event, I found myself in my study, surrounded by crumpled drafts of speeches that all felt wrong. Too sentimental, too bitter, too focused on what we had lost rather than what we had built. Sarah appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea, a gesture she had learned from my mother. She set one beside me and perched on the edge of my desk. "Still struggling?" she asked. "I don't know how to talk about them without talking about what happened after. About your parents, about the money, about all of it." "So talk about all of it," she said simply. "Not to shame anyone, not to settle scores, but because it's part of the story. Because the scholarship exists because you chose differently. Because that choice mattered." I looked at her, this woman who had stood beside me in a cemetery, who had chosen me over her family's demands, who had built a life with me based on the values my parents had modeled. "When did you get so wise?" I asked. "I married well," she said with a small smile. "And I'm learning from the best teacher I know." The ceremony was held in the same gymnasium where we had hosted the community dinner 5 years earlier. The space had been transformed with banners, displays showcasing scholarship recipients' achievements, and photographs of my parents that made them feel present in a way that was both comforting and painful. 15 former recipients attended, ranging from the first winner, now a junior in college studying social work, to the most recent, a high school senior planning to become a teacher. Each of them wore their accomplishments quietly, more focused on thanking the community than promoting themselves. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium with Grace's hand in mine. Sarah had suggested bringing her, and now I understood why. This was her legacy too. "My father once told me that the people who matter will show up," I began, my voice carrying across the quiet room. "He wrote those words in a letter I found after he died, and at the time I thought I understood what he meant. But understanding something intellectually is different from living it." I looked down at Grace, who gazed up at me with absolute trust. After my parents passed away, my wife and I were faced with a choice. We could use the inheritance they left us for a lot of different things. Some people in our lives had very specific ideas about what we should do with it, ideas that centered around spectacle and appearances rather than substance and meaning. A few people in the audience shifted, sensing where this was going. Richard sat in the third row, his face carefully neutral. He had come alone. Diane had declined the invitation. We chose differently. We chose to honor my parents not with grand gestures that would fade from memory, but with something that would keep giving long after we're gone. This scholarship isn't about academic excellence alone, though that matters. It's about recognizing the students who show up for others, who demonstrate kindness when no one's watching, who understand that real success is measured in the positive impact you have on the lives around you. I paused, looking out at the faces before me. Former students, colleagues, neighbors, people whose lives my parents had touched in ways large and small. My parents didn't leave me millions of dollars. They left me something more valuable, a blueprint for how to live a meaningful life. They showed up. They helped without expecting recognition. They measured their days not in what they accumulated, but in what they gave away. And now, through this scholarship, they're still showing up, still teaching, still making a difference. My voice cracked slightly. I wish they were here to see this, to meet these incredible young people who embody the values they held dear, to hold my daughter and tell her stories about when I was young. But in a way, they are here. In every student who chooses kindness over popularity. In every act of service that goes unrecognized. In every moment someone decides that what matters isn't what impresses others, but what improves the world. Grace tugged on my hand. "Daddy, are you sad?" I knelt beside her, aware that hundreds of eyes were on us. "A little bit, sweetheart. But I'm also happy, because your grandparents taught me that love doesn't end just because someone dies. It keeps going, like ripples in water, spreading out farther than we can see." She seemed to consider this. "Like when I throw rocks in the pond?" "Exactly like that." When I stood back up, I saw Sarah wiping her eyes. Richard had his head bowed, his shoulders shaking slightly. "So thank you," I concluded. "Thank you to everyone who has supported this program. Thank you to the students who have received these scholarships and gone on to pay it forward. And thank you to my parents, Tom and Helen Walker, who taught me that the best inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the love you leave behind." The applause was thunderous. Grace covered her ears, but she was smiling, sensing that something important had happened even if she couldn't fully understand it. After the ceremony, as people mingled over punch and cookies, Richard approached me. He looked older than I remembered. More gray in his hair, new lines around his eyes. "That was a good speech," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming," I replied, and I meant it. "I wanted to," he started, then stopped. Grace had wandered over, curious about this stranger who felt somehow familiar. "Are you my grandpa?" she asked with the bluntness of childhood. Richard's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, pain, something that might have been hope. "I'm your mother's father," he said carefully. "So yes, I suppose I am." Grace studied him with the intensity of a scientist examining a new specimen. "Do you give good hugs?" He looked at me, asking permission. I nodded. Richard knelt down, and Grace stepped into his arms tentatively. The hug was brief and awkward, but it was a start. "I have another grandpa too," Grace informed him when they separated. "But he's with the fishes now. Daddy says he would have loved me very much." "I'm sure he would have," Richard said, his voice rough. He stood up slowly, his knees creaking. "He was a good man. Better than me in a lot of ways." "You're still here, though," I said. "That counts for something." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever completely. But it was acknowledgement, an opening, a choice to let him try. That night, the four of us, Sarah, Grace, Richard, and I, went out for ice cream. It was strange and stilted at first, everyone too careful with their words, too aware of all the history that hung between us like cobwebs. But Grace, blessed with a child's ability to live entirely in the present, chattered away about her kindergarten class, her best friend Mia, the caterpillar she had found in the backyard. Richard listened with an attention that seemed almost desperate, as if he was trying to memorize every detail. "Emily's doing better," he said during a lull in Grace's monologue. "She's in therapy, dealing with a lot of things. She asked about you both." Sarah's expression remained neutral. "That's good. I'm glad she's getting help. She'd like to see Grace sometime, if you're open to it." Sarah looked at me, and I saw the question in her eyes. We had talked about this possibility, how to handle Sarah's family as Grace got older, what boundaries to maintain, what doors to leave open. "Maybe," Sarah said carefully, "but we'd need to take it slow, and it would have to be about Grace, not about making anyone feel better about the past." "I understand." Richard picked at his ice cream, which was melting into a puddle. "I'm not trying to erase what happened, or pretend it didn't matter. I don't want to miss any more of my granddaughter's life than I already have." It was the most honest thing he had said in years. Grace turned 7 the year we established the community center. Using additional funds from my parents' estate, money we had carefully saved and invested, we created a space in our neighborhood where kids could get free tutoring, where families could access resources, where people could gather for support groups and community dinners. We called it the Helen and Tom Walker Community Center. The grand opening felt surreal. Hundreds of people showed up, including faces I hadn't seen since the funeral. Mrs. Chun came with her son, the contractor, who had donated his time to help with the renovations. Former students brought their own children. Neighbors brought potluck dishes and stories about my parents that I had never heard. Richard was there, helping set up chairs and tables with an energy that surprised me. Diane had sent a card but hadn't come. Some things apparently would never change. But Emily showed up, looking nervous and uncertain, carrying a plant as an offering. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw Sarah, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry I was so awful. I'm sorry I let them poison me against you. I'm sorry I chose a wedding over my sister." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Come help me in the kitchen. We can talk while we work." I watched them walk away together, Emily following half a step behind like a younger sibling seeking approval. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a movement, a thawing. Grace ran past, chasing after a group of kids she had befriended, her laughter echoing through the space. This building, these programs, this community, it was all built on the foundation my parents had laid. Not with money, but with principles, with showing up, with caring more about impact than appearances. That evening, after the center had been cleaned up and locked, Sarah and I sat on the front steps of our house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grace was inside with Richard, who was reading her a bedtime story, something he had asked to do, and something we had agreed to cautiously allow. "Do you think they know?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Your parents. Do you think they can see what you've built?" I thought about it, listening to the sound of Richard's voice drifting through the open window, reading Where the Wild Things Are with surprising tenderness. "I don't know," I said honestly. But I like to think that wherever they are, they're proud. Not because of the buildings or the programs or the scholarships, but because we chose to live the way they taught us to live. Because we showed up. Because we measured our success by how we treated people, not by what we accumulated. They'd love Grace so much, Sarah said, her voice wistful. She knows them anyway, through stories, through the center, through the way we're raising her. I put my arm around Sarah's shoulders. Your dad's really trying. I know. It's strange. Part of me is still angry at him, at what he did, what he didn't do. But the other part of me sees an old man who's finally figured out what matters, and I don't want to punish him forever for being slow to learn. That's very gracious of you. I'm learning from the best, she said, echoing what she had told me years ago. Through the window, we could hear Richard doing the voices for the wild things, making Grace giggle. The sound was pure and joyful, untainted by the complicated history that had brought us to this moment. We made the right choice, I said, saying no to the money, building this instead. All of it. I never doubted it, Sarah replied. Well, maybe once or twice in the beginning, but not for a long time now. We sat there as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, listening to the sounds of ordinary domestic life happening around us. A dog barking down the street, a car passing by, Grace's laughter, Richard's gentle voice. This was the inheritance that mattered. Not the money my parents had left, but the values. Not the house or the possessions, but the blueprint for how to build a meaningful life. Not wealth that could be spent and forgotten, but wisdom that would echo through generations. Grace would grow up knowing her grandparents through the community center that bore their names. She would learn about kindness by seeing it modeled, about integrity by watching how we treated others, about the importance of showing up by witnessing it in action. And someday, when she was old enough to understand, I would tell her the whole story. About the funeral and the missing faces. About $50,000 and the impossible choice. About how saying no to spectacle allowed us to say yes to substance. I would tell her that her grandparents taught me that love is measured in presence, not presence. That the people who matter will show up. That the best legacy is the one you build through your actions, not the one you leave in your bank account. And I would hope that she would carry those lessons forward, creating her own ripples that would spread far beyond what we could see or imagine. The screen door opened, and Richard stepped out, Grace in his arms, already half asleep. She wanted to say good night, he said softly. I stood and took my daughter, feeling her warm weight settle against my chest, her breath soft against my neck. Love you, Daddy, she murmured. Love you too, Gracie girl. Richard stood there awkwardly for a moment. Thank you, he said finally, for tonight, for letting me be part of this, for giving me another chance to get it right. Just keep showing up, I said. That's all we ask. He nodded, understanding the weight those words carried. Then he walked to his car, his shoulders a little straighter than when he had arrived. Sarah came to stand beside me, her hand finding mine. Together we looked out at the neighborhood, at the community we had built, at the life we were creating for our daughter. You know what your dad would say if he could see this? Sarah asked. What? Good job, son. Now keep going. I smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. This wasn't an ending. It was a continuation. A choice renewed each day to live with intention, to love with action, to measure our worth not by what we had but by what we gave. Grace stirred in my arms, her small hand clutching my shirt. Behind us, our home glowed with warm light. Before us, the future stretched out full of possibility and promise. The rain had stopped long ago. The sun had set and risen and set again countless times. But the legacy my parents had built, the one we were continuing, would endure far longer than any mansion wedding or temporary spectacle. Because some things, the things that truly matter, are built to last. Thank you so much for listening to Ryan and Sarah's story. If this tale of choosing values over expectations, presence over presence, and integrity over appearances resonated with you, I'd be incredibly grateful if you would subscribe to our channel.